And I'll go ahead and get started. My name is Carrie Hunsucker. I am here with Scarlett from the Special Needs Guidance Group. And I just wanted to introduce myself first. I am a mom to a daughter who has a severe disability. We live near Orlando, Florida, and we have been receiving waiver services for the past 6 years. And I recently joined Scarlett here at the Special Needs Guidance Group. And today we are going to present on the Medicaid waiver here in Florida. So just a few housekeeping things. This is being recorded. We are hoping to be able to distribute this to our email newsletter and anyone who wasn't able to log on tonight. So just wanted to give you advance notice it's being recorded. And then Scarlett will present on the Medwaiver and then take some questions after she presents. And if you do have a question, I'll just try to kind of keep the question and answer to around 3 to 5 minutes, just to be mindful of everyone's time. So I think that's all the housekeeping we have. So Scarlett, I'll let you introduce yourself and then tell us about the Medwaiver.
Okay. Hey everyone, I'm Scarlett Kibbe. I am a former Medicaid waiver support coordinator. So I paid my dues for many, many years within the waiver program and helped families who are already on the waiver. I started to see the need for someone to help the families who were not on the waiver yet. Actually, some of the families I worked with asked me if I would start doing that. And so that's kind of how I started the Special Needs Guidance Group and started doing this. And that's how Carrie and I met. So now I work with families who are anywhere along the journey of waiver. That goes for someone who's never heard of it, to someone who's on the wait list, someone who's on the waiver, all the way to families who are on the waiver and want to utilize the CDC Plus program. And probably the most common question I'm asked, I get a lot of, for lack of a better term, cold calls from referrals from like doctors I know or other families I've worked with. And the first thing someone says is, I don't know, but so-and-so told me to call you. And so then I say, okay, are you on the waiver? And they're like, no, what's the waiver? So probably the most asked and answered question I get is, what is the waiver? So the waiver is a federally and state funded program that provides services in the home and community to individuals with very specific disabilities. Carrie may have to jump in and add because sometimes my math isn't great. There are 7 categories. Intellectual disability with an IQ below 70 that also impacts ability to live independently. Autism with pretty significant impact on communication and ability, again, to live independently. Spina bifida. I think spina bifida is categorized with Prader-Willi. So there's spina bifida and Prader-Willi, they lump together. There's Down syndrome. No, they don't lump together. Okay. In some of the handouts that APD has, they're all in one line. Okay, so then there's Down syndrome. There is Phelan-McDermid, which is the newest addition, and it's a lot more rare than the others. So what did I get? Oh, there's cerebral palsy is 6. And then the 7th is not really the wait list. It's its own little baby wait list, and it's basically high risk. So someone between the ages of 3 and 5 who has maybe not been diagnosed with one of those 6 disabilities, but is at high risk for being diagnosed with one of those. So I think I got that right. Okay, awesome. And I lost my train of thought. So those are the people who are eligible. The waiver itself is actually a program it's kind of like a stopgap. It covers things that insurance doesn't cover. So it would cover things like personal care assistance, which is basically childcare in the home. respite services. Respite and personal care are technically the same service. They're categorized differently because respite is the service that's for kids who are under 21, and personal care is the service for personal care is through Medicaid. It gets a little complicated, but basically it's the same service. It's care to come in the home and care for your child or your adult loved one. It covers consumable medical supplies like diapers and wipes, nutritional supplements, G-tube, fittings, like everything. It covers durable medical equipment, which are wheelchairs, shower chairs, bath chairs. AFOs aren't really a durable medical, but they kind of fall into that category. It'll cover renovations on your home, modifications for your vehicle to add a wheelchair lift. It also, as your child gets older, it will also cover things like adult day training. So when your child is out of school, if they can't work, then they would have the option of going to an adult day program. It would cover transportation to and from there. It covers something called supported living, which is an in-between for someone who's not living at home, but doesn't need to live in a group home. So, you know, say someone can live in their own apartment, but they need live-in staff, or they need staff to come and check on them. So it would cover that. That's called supported living. It covers group home placement. It also covers job coaching, which is technically called supported employment, and it covers supported living coaching. It covers nursing services, pretty much everything that your child or adult child with a disability needs, but isn't covered by insurance. So it's a pretty amazing program, and it is run by the Agency for Persons with Disabilities, who I will refer to lovingly as APD from here on out. And they are tasked with managing the entire waiver program, which includes the waiting list. So I'll skip over the waiting list for a minute and then come back to it. But basically, just because someone has that disability, it's not any of those disabilities. They still have to do the application, submit all the paperwork to APD, and then be determined eligible. By determined eligible, it just means, yes, you have one of those disabilities. Yes, you're a resident of Florida. You've checked all these boxes. So yes, you're eligible. Once you get that letter saying you're eligible, what comes with it is you are eligible, and now you're on the wait list in this category. There are 7 categories. Usually people are placed in the 7th category, which is the bottom of the ladder. So there is a waiting list. It is 23. I looked up the numbers a few weeks ago. It's like 23,600 and some people long right now. The waiver itself, I believe, serves between 55 and 60,000 people right now. So the waiting list is half as long as the actual waiver. So once you've done your application, submitted everything, you get your letter, you're eligible, and we've placed you on the waiting list. There's not a time limit on the waiting list. There's not if you've been on the wait list for 2 years, then you automatically are placed on the waiver. Or if your child turns 18 or 21 or 22, or there's no real movement. It's a pretty stagnant wait list. But there's also a little lottery that APD does every now and then. And I don't know that they advertise that they do it. I don't know if they're allowed to, or it's acknowledged sometimes, but every 5 to 7 years, when they have some extra funding or they're getting extra pressure that the waiting list is too long, someone sends money their way and then they pull a bunch of people off the waiting list. And they kind of do that in a lottery fashion. Over the years, So I've been working within the waiver for 15 years, and I've seen 3 rounds of the lottery happen. And there's no real rhyme or reason. I mean, I've talked to people who were on the waiting list for a few months and got that magic letter. So that's one of the reasons I really push people to get on the waiting list. You might get lucky. If you do get one of those letters, you should probably go play the real lottery that day as well. Because you're like one letter in 23,000, pretty good odds. So then there are a lot of misconceptions about the waiting list. One of those, like I said, is that at a certain age or having waited on it a certain time, that you'll just automatically be called off of it. And that's not necessarily true. Right now, the only way technically to go from waitlist to waiver is to go through APD's crisis process. So a lot of families have talked to other families who are on the waiting list or who, you know, have tried to go through the crisis process. They've heard things and they've really been discouraged to not even apply. So that's what is the phrase I say to you, Carrie? You can't win if you don't play. Yeah, it's like the lottery. I mean, if I don't play the lottery, so I have no hopes of ever winning it. But if I had a child with a developmental disability who qualified to be on the waiver, I would definitely take the steps to put them on the waiting list. It's a life-changing program. So I think that's probably about it. Carrie, if you want to jump in or if we want to start taking questions.
Yeah, I think you gave a really good overview. If anyone joined us after we kind of gave a little intro, I'm Carrie. Scarlett was just talking. She gave an overview of the Florida Medwaiver program. And then if anyone has any questions, feel free to either just unmute and shout out, or you can type your question in the chat if you want to. Feel free to do either. But now the floor is open to any questions you may have.
And don't be shy.
Yeah. I have a question. If no one else. Yeah. That high risk category that you talked about. Okay. So are people eligible to get on to the waiver if they're in the high risk, or do they have to sit on that until they're 5? And because I think my daughter was put in high risk, and I felt like the letter I got, granted this was, 7 years ago, was basically like, you're gonna have to wait and see if she's eligible. She's in high risk. Was I wrong in that?
So I actually had a really great call with the senior psychologist for APD about 2 weeks ago and asked this specific question. If you have sent everything in, okay, say it's intellectual disability, but you hadn't done specific IQ testing, because a lot of times, you'd have to do a test of nonverbal intelligence. Like if your child's not verbal, people say, well, how am I going to do an IQ test? Well, they have what's called a TONI, which is a test of nonverbal intelligence. So say at age 3, like you did with your little girl, say you did everything at 3 and they put you, but you didn't have an actual IQ score yet. They would have put you on the high risk wait list. Mm-hmm. So say at 4, she started pre-K and they started doing testing. Now you can ask the school to do a test of nonverbal intelligence. Mm-hmm. Then once they have done that, then you would submit that to APD. And in theory, they would take her from the high risk waiting list and place her on the regular waiting list. Usually parents don't know to do this or don't do this because they assume they're going to go from one to the other. When I see it come into play, in fact, I am currently working with a family now who we were in that position, And it took us almost a year to get the child moved from the high risk to the regular wait list so we could then move through the crisis process. So if you have touch and go situations with your child's health or anything that you think could turn into a crisis, then I would be pushing to get that additional testing done and submitting it to APD and kind of demanding that you be moved to the regular wait list, because like I said, it can be a process. We have some mutual families who are going through this.
Right.
So yeah.
So this leads into a question that was asked in the chat. What is the benefit, or is there any benefit of applying under the high risk category?
So if that is the only category box you can check, then that would be the benefit, because it allows you to get on there at age 3 before you have a diagnosis. So it's kind of like getting your foot in the door. However, they do have to reevaluate eligibility when you have that true diagnosis. So what I have seen within APD is, even when someone is, like, say you have a 4-year-old who's diagnosed with autism and you don't check the high risk box, you check autism and you submit everything. I have seen in many cases where they're placed on the high risk waiting list. I don't know for sure if that's just APD's procedure, that's standard procedure, or if that's a way to maybe not make the waiting list look so long. I have not gotten a straight answer on if the high risk waiting list is counted in with the waiting list numbers. So it could very well be that everyone between ages 3 and 5 is placed on there. But technically, if you have the diagnosis, one of the other 6 diagnoses, then you shouldn't be on the high risk. But the benefit of applying for high risk is you're kind of getting your foot in the door early.
I have a question. If someone had 2 diagnoses, say they have CP and autism, their child does, can they put both down, or do they have to pick one? Like,
they can put both down, and I am going to tell you to put CP down first as the primary. The reason being is autism and intellectual disability are not simply check the box. Cerebral palsy does have some impacting conditions, like it's supposed to impact to some degree, but it is more of a check the box. Yes, I have cerebral palsy, automatic onto the waiver. Same with Down syndrome. Whereas intellectual disability and autism have to impact, they have a whole set of characteristics that have to be evident. So you have to send a lot more information, and there's a lot more for APD to go through. So if your child has more than one of those diagnoses, I would check anything as the primary other than intellectual disability and autism. Those would be the last. I mean, you want to check all of the disabilities, but those 2 are they're just not as straightforward, and they're very heavily scrutinized at this point, because APD is being tasked with making certain everyone who's on the waiver should be on the waiver. If they have a situation where they have someone that they've approved wrongfully, then what happens in 10 years when they go back through and they realize this person shouldn't be on the waiver? They don't want to be in a situation like that. So yeah, check all the boxes, but check ID and ASD last.
Okay. All right.
Does anyone else have a question?
While people are thinking, I do have another one.
Okay.
If someone has to have their diagnosis prior to age 18, right?
Okay, so that is a muddled line within the statute. 65G is the Florida statute. And I think it's section 4.014. And that's sad that I know these. That's really sad that I know these. It goes over eligibility, and one of the things in the statute that is a big deal is it does not say it must be diagnosed prior to age 18. It must have manifested. So the symptoms of that disability must have been evident and manifested before age 18. I will say that having diagnostics that were done before age 18 makes life a lot easier. They are less and less likely to accept diagnostics that were done past age 18. However, they do realize we have a lot of elderly caregivers now whose, their children are in their 40s and 50s, and these caregivers are passing away. And sometimes, the diagnostic material they've been out of school for 30 years. They don't have it. They don't have access to it. So legally, they are supposed to take newer testing, but it's best practice to try to get it done well before age 18, if at all possible. But no, it doesn't have to be diagnosed before age 18. Just has to be, you have to be able to see the paper trail.
Okay. And then if someone is over 21, does that, do they still get Medicaid? Like let's say Hazel, my daughter is, almost 10 now. When she turns 21, she will still have Medicaid her whole life, right?
Yes. Okay. She'll still have Medicaid.
Okay.
What Medicaid covers will be different. So up to age 21, like Hazel, nursing, her consumables, durable medical equipment, pretty much everything she's getting is funded by Medicaid right now, except for the respite services she gets. So the day before she turns 21 is the last day that those services are covered. All of her therapies, all of that. It would transition over on her 21st birthday. Those services would no longer be eligible for her through Medicaid. So then Waiver would start picking up the tab for that. And that's a process too. It's not necessarily a Waiver's just going to magically start doing it. If you're on the Waiver, your support coordinator would need to start the paperwork about 6 months beforehand to make sure that there's not a gap with that. So, but she would still have Medicaid. It's just what Medicaid would cover would change.
Okay. Makes sense. I was curious if anyone who's on the call wants to share if you are on the wait list yet, or if you're not. You don't have to speak up if you don't want to, but this is your time to ask any questions if you have any. Or are you a provider that just wants to learn more information? But I'm just curious if many of you are already on the wait list or not.
Hi, I'm Nancy, and I'll speak up. I just got into the meeting because I just got home from work.
Hey, Nancy.
We are on the wait list. We have been on the wait list for forever, and we never seem to hear from anybody about anything that we would be eligible for or not eligible for. My Down syndrome son, age just turned 26.
Oh.
So he's probably eligible for some things, but for whatever reason, we've done a good job of keeping him employed and happy and healthy. So we haven't had to use much of those services. Doesn't mean that we wouldn't like to, because we were just talking about it the other day about wanting to maybe send him to a camp or something like that. However, cost prohibitive when you're trying to get it into your budget. So
yeah, for sure. Can I ask, would you mind sharing what part of the state you're in?
Yeah, I'm in Winter Garden.
Okay.
So I'm in West Orange County.
Okay. I would recommend you reach out to the APD office, that's your local office.
Okay.
Just give them a call and say, my son is on the waiting list, and I just want to check in on our status. Maybe mention the word crisis.
Funny.
You know,
Funny. Well, what defines a crisis? I guess would be my answer to that. My
okay,
husband is a little bit older than I am, and many times, what am I saying? Many times, every day I leave to go to work, and I leave my husband, who is 87, and my son, who is 26, at home together,
okay.
and I go to work in an office.
Yeah, you need to call your local office.
Okay.
You need to call your local office and just say that, actually. So the crisis categories, as the statute lays them out, are homelessness, which quite obviously your child's not homeless. And I'm guessing every single one of you who's on here, you do not have a homeless child, nor will you ever allow them to be homeless. So that takes that off the table. The second one is danger to self or others. And the third is caregiver unable to give care. And I will say in the crisis statutes, there are, well, they don't list them by number, they're by letter. I think the second category goes to L, maybe, and the third category kind of does the same. So it's not just a flat out caregiver unable to give care because you're dying. It's, there's a whole list and a host of characteristics, age being one of those. So over the age of 70 is a big deal, a very big deal.
Does it have to be primary caregiver?
It doesn't necessarily, and so here's where it gets muddy. So this is actually the bulk of what I have been doing for 5 years. Is mostly I worked with crisis cases. I've helped families navigate and get on the waiver through the crisis process. Every region is different.
Okay.
It's not a perfect system. I don't want to speak ill of APD. They really, most of the people who work for APD joined it because they're social workers at heart and they really want to help. But it's a very flawed system. And it's a government system and program. It's cumbersome would be the nicest way to put it. But every region does kind of operate differently with crisis. Some of that reason is because some regions serve a lot more clients than others. So, the smaller regions sometimes tend to be a little more lenient with crisis. Yeah.
So, and I'm sorry that I had to join late. Did we talk about where the regions were, or if we would have the opportunity to move out of a large region like Orange County to move to a smaller region like I can't even think of a smaller region right now.
West Palm.
Okay, West Palm, that'll work. Do you still remain where you were, or do you have to reapply?
So you transfer to that region. You never leave the wait list, but you should reach out to APD anytime you have an address change, especially anytime. We had about 7 or 8 years ago, APD went through and was trying to update everyone's addresses and information, and they sent out letters, and anyone who didn't reply, they kicked off the wait list. Ooh. They're not doing that anymore, but it is very, very important that you try to keep your address updated with APD in case something like that would ever happen. Because I can tell you some horror stories. So staying in contact, and then if you move out of your county, so like, for example, Lake County is right next to Volusia County. There are 2 different regions. Lake would be Orlando region, and Volusia is Northeast, Jacksonville region. So even if you only move 10 miles, if you cross one of those county lines that puts you in another region, it would put you in another office. But one of the biggest things that I stress to families is really trying to establish a rapport and a relationship with someone at your APD office. It might take you a year or 2 to find someone you click with, but if you get someone on the phone who's really nice and kind of goes above and beyond, get their name, their full name and their phone number, and try to keep track of them.
Well, I can tell you that we have not changed addresses in 8 years.
Okay.
And the last time we talked to somebody from APD, we actually had someone come to our home
Mhm.
here where we live, where we currently live. So we've been at the same address and say, yeah, then, and said just exactly what you said. We're trying to update records and make sure that everybody's still on the,
Mhm.
you know, and, but your son doesn't qualify for anything yet.
So technically, and that may have been what was called a QSI assessment. They're supposed to do those every 3 years, and they're trying to do them for people who are on the wait list and on the waiver. And it goes in and it assesses needs, and then they input it in the system. And it's supposed to help categorize, put people in the right wait list category. But if you've had an assessor come out who just out and out says you don't qualify or you don't, that's not really their job, and that's not necessarily accurate. Your best bet is to really stay in as close a contact as you can.
Okay.
You know, the squeaky wheel gets the grease. So yeah, I would recommend you contact your Orlando office.
Okay.
And just try to find someone and just ask, you know, what's our status on the waiting list, and you know, this is our situation right now. And a lot of times, I mean, I've had families who thought they needed me to get them through the crisis process, and I was like, well, no, just call and see. A lot of families can navigate it and do navigate it on their own. I think a big part of that is just getting the right APD staff on the phone with you. So, yeah. Carrie?
Scarlett, I got a new question came in the chat.
Yeah, and sorry, you have to interrupt me when I go over.
That's okay. Someone asked, new to the waiver and have tried calling my local office, but it goes to voicemail and I have left messages, but I don't hear back. It's been a few weeks. Is this normal? And should I keep calling or wait to hear back?
Keep calling. Definitely keep calling. APD was on a hiring freeze for many, many years, and they're a government agency that did not raise their rate of pay for a long time. I know in our Jacksonville region, it was a skeleton crew for years because they were on a hiring freeze. So when someone left, they were not allowed legally to bring someone else in. So most APD offices are really operating way below. I mean, one person who should have one caseload might be working with the equivalent of 4 caseloads. So I would definitely keep calling. And the other thing is, go on the website and you can look at regions and click on the region that you're in, and there should be a map. They changed the website and they update things. So I don't hold me to it. Don't quote me because I'm not on there every day. But there should be a map that shows all the regions and the counties within the regions. So you can go on there and you can then find the staff. It lists, well, and the staff's names and positions may not always be updated, but you can work your way up the food chain and finding someone else and someone else. The other thing is, everyone at APD has their email address is their first name dot their last name at apdcares.org. Another thing I stress to families all the time is, if it's not in writing, it didn't happen. Keep a paper trail. So like, for example, you call the Orlando office and you talk to Jane Smith, and she tells you something that you're like, you know, I don't know, that didn't sound accurate. I would get off the phone with her and type up an email to jane.smith@apdcares.org and say, hey, Jane, we just got off the phone. This is about my son, and summarize what the conversation was so that you can have that in writing. But honestly, email is probably the best way to get in touch with most APD staff. Again, they're very understaffed. So I'm not trying to make excuses for them, but I do know firsthand that they're extremely understaffed. So it's a lot easier for them to respond to emails than it is to call everyone back who calls. So yeah, keep calling or emailing.
Yeah, Scarlett, I posted in the chat. I don't know if you're looking at it, but I posted the region list. And then if anyone goes to that link, you can drill down. There's a map there. You can click on your county. And then when you're looking at your county page, you can keep clicking and you can find your county with the listing of the staff contacts. So I posted an example in the chat of, you know, for me, Orange County, drill down to the staff directory. So that gives you email addresses. And then what would you say? Like email them once a week? I mean, what's appropriate amount of time to wait?
I don't know. I would put a reminder in your phone and email. Yeah, I mean, maybe once a week. You don't want to be too much of a pest, but at the same time, you need an answer.
Right.
So, and if you're not getting a response from that person, then like I said, I would start working your way through everyone who's on that list for that region. You know, someone's bound to get back to you. So, yeah.
That makes sense. So for anyone who is logged on late or anything, we are now in the question and answer session. Don't worry about asking a question. If you came in late, feel free to ask anything that you have about the Medwaiver. We did ask, you know, if anyone is comfortable, if they want to share, if they're on the wait list or you know, aren't yet on it, any questions they have, or if they're receiving services. Oh, Scarlett, why don't you tell people about CDC Plus? Maybe you can mention what that is.
Okay.
I don't know. Will that be too confusing? But
okay. So once you're on the waiver, there is this subsidiary program that is amazing. That allows you to take your child's annual budget, it divides it into a monthly budget, and it creates a flexible spending account per se. You can hire your own employees. You can pay them a higher rate of pay than APD's going rate. You don't have to go through agencies. You can, if you're in a 2-parent household, if one of you basically isn't able to work because you're caring for your child, that parent could then become the paid caregiver. A lot of families who are on CDC Plus use it in that manner. And then what happens is, you know, they're paid for their time that they're caring for their child. But what I see is they turn around and use that money that they're paid, they use their paycheck to pay for all the extras that aren't covered. It also, there are a lot of little things that you can funnel directly through CDC Plus. So like specific dietary needs, things that just wouldn't be covered if you were on regular waiver or that Medicaid doesn't cover, supplements, stuff like that. Camps can be paid for through CDC Plus. It's a pretty remarkable program. And the reason it came to be is other states have it. But the theory behind it is that parents will do a better job being the gatekeeper for their child's funding than the state necessarily does. So when you go on CDC Plus, you basically trade your full budget for, they take 8% off, just that's, you know, for getting to be on CDC Plus. And then they take another 4%, which covers the APD admin stuff. So from APD's standpoint, I think CDC Plus is just the way to go. I mean, it doesn't pay for itself, but it definitely, you know, the state's saving 12%. So I would think that the state would push for more and more families to go on CDC Plus. That being said, there's a lot of paperwork. Carrie can attest to how redundant and cumbersome a lot of it is. But once you get through the red tape and you learn CDC Plus, I don't know any parents who would ever willingly go back to regular waiver. Would you, Carrie?
Sorry, I was muted. No, I'm sitting here writing down notes. I'm like, supplements. I need to add supplements to Hazel's plan.
Right.
But yes, so yeah, anyone who came in late, my daughter is on the waiver. She's been on it for 6 years. And then I think we went on CDC Plus maybe 1 or 2 years ago.
2. I think it's been close to 2. Yeah.
Yeah. Yes. So right now we use it mainly to pay our respite worker a good wage and to hire and keep a really good respite worker, but I have money that I could be spending on all the supplements, and Hazel's on the keto diet. So we've got all kinds of things that insurance won't cover that I know we're spending a lot every month on that I need to put into her CBC Plus spending plan.
Yeah.
So,
and you just actually reminded me of the other thing about CDC Plus that's so phenomenal. So at the end of every fiscal year, when you're on regular waiver, your cost plan starts over and your services start over. So if you had 100 hours of respite that you didn't use by the end of June, it's gone and it starts over. CDC Plus does not do that. That funding rolls into savings and rolls from fiscal year to fiscal year. So I've had families save a lot of money to like completely redo a bathroom so that it's completely like roll-in shower, widen doorways, everything. I mean, like a lot of money that they've saved for several years through CDC Plus to be able to fund and do that. So yeah, that's something about CDC Plus that I always forget. Now the state does have the option every year to Medicaid can recoup that rollover. It's not a given, but they've only done it once in the history of the program. In the 20 years we've had the program in Florida, they've only done it once. So yeah, getting to save that money is a really big deal for families on CDC Plus.
I have a question. So we do need bathroom renovations. Hazel's in a wheelchair, you know, it's very thin doors. Do I have to save up for CDC Plus money, or, I mean, because how are we going to save up enough?
Well, so technically your support coordinator, if it's what's considered a significant additional need, so a SAN, then they can request that additional one-time funding from APD through what's called a significant additional need, a SAN, the SAN process. So you don't always have to save that up. You can have your support coordinator request that one-time increase in funding, and you can do that. I've had families who, like, mom had a scheduled surgery 6 months out, and we knew that we were going to need round-the-clock care to be able to take care of her daughter for 3 months after the surgery, like the shoulder surgeries. They're pretty intensive, and I mean, geez, mom needed someone to bathe her. So if you give your coordinator enough time and advance notice, they can do a SAN to get that increase in services and supports for that time period. That's not something, I mean, support coordinators may not love me for saying that, because it is a lot of work, but the good support coordinators are willing to do that extra work for their clients and make sure they have what they need. So, yeah.
Okay. Well, we are rounding out to the last quarter of an hour. We're wrapping up. Does anyone have a question before we sign off? All right, Scarlett, I think we can wrap it up.
Okay.
Oh, is Nancy coming back on to ask a question?
I couldn't get the button. What is there a stipulation when I'm gone or when my husband is gone and a sibling takes care of, you know, will become the caregiver for my son? Does it roll with Brent, or would it roll with me?
So are you talking about if you're on the waiver?
Yes.
So in that instance, I would have, if you don't have guardianship set up, then I would be moving towards having guardianship set up so that it would pass to your other sibling. And if you're on waiver, you would want to make sure your support coordinator was fully aware of all of those things, so that if something did happen to you, you know, they had your son's contact, they kind of knew what the plan was. If you're still on the waiting list, then I would be putting him as a secondary contact for sure.
Okay.
so that they would have that. And I would let your son know. I would have like a binder and say, okay, this is all your brother's info, and you know, you need to stay on top of this, 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 and this.
Okay.
But it follows your son. The waiver follows your son who has the disability, but keeping everyone in the loop is pretty important for sure. So
That's phenomenal. Thank
yeah.
you.
You're welcome. You're welcome. Thank you for speaking up. I'm glad to answer questions. I love to
Never
talk.
wanted to be shy.
Well, good. You can't be with a child who needs you.
No. So,
Yeah.
All right.
well, I will, and because I don't know where we actually hit. I don't know whether we're still, I'm pretty sure we're still waitlisted.
Oh yeah, you would
Okay.
know if you weren't.
Okay.
Start calling and saying the things that you said to me.
Okay.
For sure.
I will.
Yeah. Okay.
No
Good
problem
luck.
there. All
Keep
right.
us posted.
All right. We will.
All right.
Thank you both.
Thank
You're
you,
welcome.
Nancy.
Good luck
All
with
right.
everything.
Thank you. You
Bye.
too.
Bye.
Thank you.